Okay, everybody, you have a decimal test this week, so I wanted to make sure that I told you the top 5 things that you need to know about decimals. So if you're studying for your math test, which hopefully you are with your parents, these are the top 5 things that you need to know all about decimals. There's 5 main things. Are you ready for number 1? Now, after I tell you each thing that you have to know about decimals, we are going to review it together, okay? So number 1, you need to know that all decimals have a place value. Decimals have a place value. Here is the decimal place value chart. You can see that before the decimal, there's ones, tens, hundreds, but after the decimal, there are tenths, hundredths, thousands. These are the 3 blanks that you have to remember. Tenths, hundreds, thousands, and what order they go in. So let's practice that, okay? Because for your decimal test, you need to practice before the real test, okay? There's a little bit of a glare, so I'll try to hold it over here, okay? All right, so we have the tens place, the hundreds place, the thousands place. So if you see a fraction and the fraction looks like this, 3 over 10, that means there are 10 things and you only have 3 out of those 10 things. So that's 3 tenths. All right, so how am I gonna write that as a decimal? Well, I've gotta go, since it's out of tenths, I've gotta go to the 10th place. The 10th place is first, so I'm gonna do 0.3. So 3 tenths looks the same thing as 0.3, everybody. Okay, but let's practice another one, okay? Let's say we're gonna do it out of hundreds this time, everyone. Okay, so let's say we're gonna do 75 out of 100, 75 out of 100. How do we now write this as a decimal, 75 out of 100? 75 out of 100 out of a fraction looks like this, 75 over 100. But to write that as a decimal, you are gonna do, it's gotta end in the hundreds place. The decimal that you write has to stop or end in the hundreds place. So you're gonna do point again, and then a 7 and a 5. So 75 out of 100 equals the same thing as 0.75, okay? So that's how you change a fraction into a decimal, right? Let's practice thousands. I'm gonna make this one a little bit trickier than before, okay? All right, this time, let's say you only have 16 out of 1,000. You don't have very much at all because you only get 16 out of 1,000 of something, okay? So how are you going to write that as a decimal? Well, it's got to end in the thousands place. So this 6 has got to go all the way here to the thousands place, and the 1's got to go here. So it leaves an empty space in the tens place. Anytime there's an empty space like that for a decimal, all you're asked to do is to put a 0 right there. So it's 0.06, or the same thing as 16 out of 1,000. It looks like this. 16 thousandths, 0.016. Okay, so you need to know that decimals have a place value, and that place value again is tenths go first, then hundredths, then thousands. Okay, if you know that, you're off to a good start for your decimal test. But there's number 2. That was only number 1. That was only the first thing that you need to know about decimals. Here's the second thing that you need to know about decimals. Decimals can also represent a mixed number and a fraction. We just did some that were fractions, but look at this picture right here. Fractions and mixed numbers can also equal a decimal. This fraction right here is 3/4. It also stands for 0.75, that's a decimal, 75%. You can also do a mixed number like 3 3/4 can equal a decimal. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, let's do a mixed number first, okay? Let's do 5 6/10. 5 6/10. How am I going to write that as a decimal? Well, this 5 represents a whole number. So you don't even want to put that after the decimal because it's a whole. So you're going to put the big 5 first, it's a whole number, and then you're just going to write 6/10, which is 0.6. So this is how a mixed number can also equal a fraction. Now, there were some that were a little bit trickier than that one, okay? There were some that looked like this. They were super hard. I was like, how does 8 1/2 equal a decimal? Because there's no tenths, there's no hundreds. There's no thousands. What are we going to do? You're going to have to make it either tenths, hundreds, or thousands. And in this case, you can multiply something by 2 to equal tenths. So we're going to put a 10 here. And we're going to say, what times 2 equals 10? Well, it's 5. So if you do that on the bottom, you have to do that on the top. So 8 1/2 equals the same thing as 8 5/10. So you write that as a decimal as 8.5. 8.5 should be your answer. It's the same thing as 8 1/2. Let's do another mixed number and change that into a decimal, everybody. Let's change it into a decimal. Okay, I hope you're enjoying decimals. I was really proud of you guys last week. You guys did a great job with decimals. This week is just kind of a review because you have a decimal test and a decimal quiz, okay? Let's do 7 3/100. The fraction and mixed number. This is a mixed number because it has a whole number and a fraction. We talked about mixed numbers already this school year. 7 3/100. You can still write that as a decimal. You guys think you know the correct answer? You can do it like this. 7 point. Now it's not tenths, so you cannot put 7.3. 7.03. This is how you would write 7 3/100 now as a decimal, 7.03. Okay, that's the second thing you need to know about decimals before your big test this week. Number 1, that all decimals have a place value. Number 2, that mixed numbers and fractions can be decimals. Here's number 3 that you need to know. You need to know that money, you can think of money and decimals together. Because look in this picture. If you have $100, that's in the hundreds place. If you have $40, that's 4 tens. If you have $7, that's 7 ones. Actually, this is $800. That's amazing. $847. We'd all love to have that. But if you have a 0.3, the 0.3 is in the tenths place, which stands for dimes. Dimes represent tenths. The 6 is in the hundreds place because 6 cents means you have 6 out of 100, okay? So let's say we had $5.62. The 5 represents 5 whole ones. The 6 represents 6 tenths, which actually represents 6 dimes, 60 cents. The 2 represents 2 pennies, which are 2 out of 100 because it takes 100 pennies to equal $1, okay? So if you put a dollar sign on up here, it's the same thing. 5.62 is the same thing as $5.62. You have to know that this place value right here is the dimes and this is the pennies, okay? So you might see this on a test and it might ask you how many dollars, how many dimes, how many pennies, right? So there are gonna be $5, 6 dimes, 2 pennies. We've done this before on a test when we studied money, so you should be familiar with this, but I want you to remember that decimals and money go together, okay? All right, that's the third thing that you need to know about decimals before your big test. So first, we learned, number 1, that all decimals have a place value. You guys know what the place value is? Tenths, hundreds, thousands. The second thing that we learned is that mixed numbers and fractions can also represent decimals. And the third thing that we learned is that money and decimals go together. Okay, now for the fourth thing that we need to know. The fourth thing that you need to know about decimals is when you're adding or subtracting decimals or when you're rounding decimals, you have to line up the decimal point. Line up the decimals when you're adding or subtracting. Look at this picture right here. 15 and 525 out of 1,000 and 7 and 92 out of 100. If they're gonna add those together, they have to line up this decimal point right here, okay? So let's do a practice problem together. Let's say I wanted to add 3 and 200ths and 7 and 800ths. 3 and 200ths and 8 and 700ths. So I'm gonna write 3 and 200ths. 3 and 200ths looks like this. And 8 and 7/10. I'm sorry, I think I'm saying it wrong because I don't have it in front of me. 8 and 7/10. So I'm going to do 8, 7/10 but I have to make sure my decimals are lined up right here before I ever start adding. Even though this has 2 place values right here and this only has 1, if there's a missing one, you can put a 0 there. But you still have to line up. Do you see where this decimal point is lined up? Before you ever start to add, you have to line it up. Once it's lined up, you can add no problem. 2 plus 0 is 2, 7 plus 0 is 7, and 3 plus 8 is 11. This next thing you have to remember is to bring down the decimal point. Bring down the decimal point anytime you're adding or subtracting, okay? All right, remember to line up the decimal point. Okay, so the first thing that we learned is that all decimals have a place value, tenths, hundreds, thousands. The second thing that we learned is that fractions and mixed numbers can also represent a decimal. The third thing that we learned is that money and decimals go hand in hand. And the fourth thing that we learned is you have to line up your decimals when you're adding and subtracting. This is the last thing, number 5, the fifth most important thing that you have to know about decimals is how to round decimals. Here's a little poem to help you. It says, let me see if I can, underline the digit, looks next door. If it's 5 or greater, add 1 more. If it's less than 5, leave it for sure. Everything after is a 0, not more. If you want to look at this poem again, it's how to round. Now, the way we say it is a little bit different, but you still need to know how to round decimals. So let me show you an example of how to round a decimal. So if I have 3.64 and I want to round this decimal to the nearest tenths place, I've got to find the tenths place first. Is this the 10th place? Is this the 10th place? Is this the 10th place? You're right. The 6 is in the 10th place. I want everybody to draw their arrows. I know some of you are like, I don't need to draw the arrow. I can do it in my head. I think it's best just to draw the arrows, okay? So it says 3.64. I look beside the 6 and I say, are you bigger than 5? Are you smaller than 5? And the 4 is smaller than 5. So the 6 is going to stay the same and the rest becomes zeros. So the 3 then stays the same, the 6 stay the same, and the 4 becomes 0, and your answer should look like this, 3.60, 3.60, okay? All right, let's practice doing another rounding of a decimal because there's going to be several of them, okay? So let's do 5.87, okay? And now we're going to round this decimal to the nearest whole number, not to the nearest tenth. So I'm going to underline the whole number, look beside it, and say, are you bigger than 5? Are you smaller than 5? Well, 8 is obviously bigger than 5. So this 5 now can't stay the same. It has to get bigger, and the rest becomes zeros. So now we're going to do 6.00, and that is your answer, 6.00. Okay, so parents and students, I know you want to get a good grade on your decimal test this week because you've been working really hard on decimals for the last couple of weeks and you really know it. So these are the things that you need to remember to practice. If you practice these things, you're going to do great. Number 1, all decimals have a place value, tenths, hundreds, thousands. Number 2, mixed numbers and fractions can also be decimals. Look at this 3/4. It can be several different things. Number 3, money and decimals go hand in hand. Money and decimals go hand in hand. Number 4, when you're adding or subtracting decimals, you have to line up the decimal point. And number 5, you have to know the steps of how to round a decimal. If you want to come up with a little song for this poem, you can do that. All right, those are the top 5 things, you guys, the top 5 things in 3rd grade that you need to know about decimals. And if you learn decimals, you're going to be prepared not only for 4th grade, but also for middle school and high school because you do a lot of decimals in those grades. Have an awesome day learning about decimals. Bye, everybody.